Nobody expects the most powerful man in Seoul to come undone over a resignation letter. No screaming, no betrayal, no dramatic last words. Just a cream-colored envelope sitting dead center on his desk, and an empire that suddenly forgot how to breathe. For 6 years, she was invisible. She ran everything, fixed everything, carried everything. And she did it all while quietly, desperately, hopelessly, falling in love with the man who never once looked up long enough to see her. The day she stopped showing up, he finally understood what he'd lost. But by then, she was already gone. Drop a like and comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. Stay until the end. You won't regret it. The envelope wasn't sealed. That was the first thing Adrian noticed when he walked into his office at 5:47 in the morning, still carrying the faint smell of jet fuel from his flight back from Tokyo. The cream-colored rectangle sat exactly in the center of his desk, not left carelessly, not forgotten, but placed with surgical precision in the one spot he could never miss. And the flap was open, tucked neatly back against itself, as though she had wanted to make sure he could get to the letter without any unnecessary effort. Even in leaving, Camille Brooks had made things easier for him. He stood there for a long moment, his coat still on, his briefcase still in his hand. The Seoul skyline burned orange and purple through the floor-to-ceiling glass behind the desk, and for a few seconds, the office felt enormous in a way it never had before. Too much space, too many surfaces, all of it achingly quiet. He set the briefcase down, walked around the desk, sat. The letter was 2 paragraphs, short, clean, no unnecessary words. Mr. Huang, I am submitting my formal resignation from my position as Chief Executive Assistant, effective immediately. It has been an honor to support HWG Group over the past 6 years. I wish the company continued success. CB. That was it. No explanation, no apology, not a single sentence that told him why. Adrian read it twice. Then he set it on the desk, leaned back in his chair, and stared at the ceiling. His first thought, the one that came before anything else, was practical. She can't do this right now. The Busan deal closes in 11 days. His second thought arrived about 30 seconds later, quieter and far less manageable. She actually left. He called her at 6:02 a.m. The phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Her professional greeting, crisp and calm, filled his ear. You've reached Camille Brooks. Please leave a detailed message and I'll return your call as soon as possible. And he hung up without saying anything. He called again at 6:15. Same result. He sent a text at 6:30. I need to speak with you, today. This isn't negotiable. He stared at his phone for the next 20 minutes, waiting for 3 dots to appear. They never did. By 7 a.m., he had convinced himself she was simply being dramatic. People didn't just leave. They threatened to leave, and then they stayed, because leaving required follow-through, and Camille had always been the most disciplined person in any room. This was probably a negotiation. She wanted more authority, a raise, a title change, something he could address with a single phone call and have resolved by noon. By 7:45, when his phone still hadn't rung and his first 3 morning briefings were already falling apart without her preliminary notes to anchor them, he started to understand that this might not be a negotiation. By 9 o'clock, when her building security badge stopped working and Human Resources confirmed she had already submitted all required departure paperwork, completed, notarized, and time-stamped 11:58 p.m. the previous evening, he understood something else entirely. She hadn't just decided to leave last night. She had been planning this for a while. The thing about Camille Brooks was that nobody truly understood what she did until she stopped doing it. On paper, her title was Chief Executive Assistant. In practice, she was the connective tissue of HWG Group, the invisible architecture that held a $40 billion empire upright. She knew which senior vice president needed to be called before a quarterly report dropped, because he panicked under pressure and would say something destructive to the press if he wasn't prepared. She knew which board member's ego required careful management during strategy meetings, and she knew exactly what kind of language to use in correspondence to avoid triggering his insecurities. She knew the rhythm of Adrian's moods, could tell from the way he walked whether the morning would require directness or diplomacy, and she adjusted the energy of every room accordingly before he even arrived. She was also the only person in the building who pushed back on him. Not loudly. Never loudly. She would wait until the room cleared, and then she would lean against the doorframe and say something like, "That decision is going to cost you the Choi partnership." Or, "You were condescending to Min Jun in there, and he noticed," or simply, "You're wrong about this one, and you already know it." He'd argue with her. He always argued with her. And then, usually within 24 hours, he'd realize she'd been right and quietly adjust course without ever acknowledging the source of his recalibration. It was a system that worked perfectly, as long as she stayed. Without her, the machinery began grinding almost immediately. His 10:30 briefing with the Tokyo liaison team ran 17 minutes long because no one had prepared the comparative market summary she always distributed beforehand. His 1 p.m. lunch with potential investors from Singapore turned awkward halfway through when Adrian realized he couldn't remember the name of the investor's daughter, who was apparently attending Yonsei University and whose name Camille always quietly noted on the pre-meeting brief. A small human detail that invariably generated goodwill and moved negotiations forward. He stumbled through it, made something up. The name landed wrong, and the investor's expression shifted just slightly. Not offended, but recalibrated. And Adrian felt the warmth drain from the room in real time. It was the smallest thing, an embarrassingly small thing, but it reminded him of something he had never had to think about before. Camille had always made him look like he cared about people. He wasn't entirely sure, sitting across from that investor with his incorrect daughter name still hanging in the air, whether he did. He sent one more text at 3:30 p.m. "Camille, whatever this is about, we can discuss it. Come back in and we'll talk." She replied 22 minutes later. It was the first response she'd sent all day. "There's nothing to discuss, Mr. Huang. My decision is final. The transition folder is in the shared drive. Everything is documented. You'll be fine." He read it 3 times. The Mr. Huang stung in a way he hadn't anticipated. They'd long since settled into first names during private conversations, and the formality felt deliberate, like a door being shut. "You'll be fine" was worse. It wasn't cruel, it was just indifferent. As though she had already emotionally evacuated, had already moved him from the category of person I care about to problem I've already solved, and was simply tidying up the last administrative details. He typed, "This isn't about the company. I want to talk to you." He stared at what he'd written for almost a full minute. Then he deleted it. He typed, "At least tell me why." He deleted that too. He put his phone face down on the desk and went back to work. The why had been accumulating for years, though he didn't know that yet. Camille had first understood she was in trouble approximately 3 years into the job during a night flight back from Geneva. They'd been running on almost no sleep. 36 hours of negotiations with a Swiss infrastructure consortium had finally concluded, and they were both seated in the private cabin, the lights dimmed, the hum of the plane the only sound. Adrian had fallen asleep almost immediately in the seat across from hers, jacket folded across his lap, the lines of his face finally relaxed without the constant weight of performance. She'd been reviewing documents on her tablet when she looked up and found herself unable to look away. He looked human. That was all. He just looked like an actual human being instead of a machine built to optimize everything it touched, and something in her chest did something complicated and unwelcome. And she looked back at her tablet immediately and thought, absolutely not. Never. Get it together. She was very disciplined. She got it together. She kept getting it together, repeatedly, over the following 3 years, until getting it together started to cost more than she was willing to admit. The worst part wasn't the feelings themselves. The worst part was that there was a version of the situation she could almost believe in. Adrian wasn't cold with her. He was demanding, yes. Relentless, definitely. He expected near impossible things from her on a near constant basis. But he also trusted her in a way he trusted very few people, and occasionally, in the quiet hours between crises, there was a particular quality to their interactions that felt like something. She could never name it precisely. A mutual frequency. An ease that didn't exist in his relationships with other people. She'd built an entire emotional infrastructure on that unnamed something, which was why the night she overheard him destroy it so completely and casually was the night everything began to end. It was a Tuesday in late November. She'd been walking back to her office after an evening meeting, passing the partially open door of the executive lounge, when she heard Adrian's voice inside. He was speaking with Tae-Jun Yu, one of his most senior advisors, a man old enough to be his uncle, trusted enough to speak plainly. You need to start thinking about succession planning, Taejun was saying. Not just for the board, for your personal team as well. You can't build a $40 billion structure on the shoulders of one person. I know, Adrian said. Camille's been with you 6 years. She could be recruited away tomorrow. Someone will try eventually. A pause, then, I can't afford to lose Camille. She stopped walking. Why not? Taejun asked. Because replacing her operational capacity would take 3 people in 2 years. She runs everything that I don't have time to run, and she runs it better than I would anyway. The institutional knowledge alone. She didn't hear the rest of the sentence. Her own heartbeat was too loud. I can't afford to lose Camille. She had imagined, in her weaker moments, what it might sound like if he said her name in that particular tone. Weighted, significant, undeniable. She had not imagined this. This was the vocabulary of asset management. She was irreplaceable the way a server system was irreplaceable, the way a load-bearing wall was irreplaceable. Not because of who she was, but because of what she did and what removing her would cost. She walked back to her office, sat down at her desk, looked at her hands. 6 years. She had given 6 years of her finest hours to a man who had just summarized her existence in terms of operational capacity and institutional knowledge. And the most devastating part, the part she had to sit with for the next 3 weeks before she could think clearly about anything, was that he hadn't said anything wrong. He hadn't been cruel. He had simply been honest. And what the honesty revealed was that he had never seen her the way she had spent 6 years hoping, in her quietest moments, to be seen. She was efficient. She was dependable. She was convenient. She was not loved. The resignation letter took her 11 drafts in 4 weeks. The first drafts were too long, full of things she wanted to say and knew she had no right to say in a professional document. She deleted paragraph after paragraph of carefully contained grief and got shorter and shorter until she arrived at the 2 paragraphs she'd left on his desk. Clean, professional, final. She told no one at the office. She didn't trust herself not to be talked out of it by someone well-meaning and wrong about her circumstances. She completed the transition folder instead, 73 pages, meticulously organized, documenting every process, every contact relationship, every unwritten protocol that existed only in her head. She wanted the company to survive without her. She even wanted him to survive without her, which cost her something she didn't examine too closely. She booked her flight to Atlanta 3 days before she resigned. One way. The night before her last day, she stayed at the office until almost midnight, saying goodbye to the desk, the view, the coffee machine in the executive kitchen that she had fixed herself twice because the repair service took too long. She was fully aware that this was pathetic, and she did it anyway. She took nothing with her except her personal items and a small succulent plant she'd been keeping on her windowsill for 2 years. The plant was named Gerald. She'd named it during a particularly long night of budget projections, half delirious from caffeine and impossible numbers, and the name had stuck. She tucked Gerald under her arm, left the envelope on the desk, and walked out of HWG Group for the last time at 11:51 p.m. without looking back. She almost looked back, but she didn't. Back in Atlanta, the first thing her mother said when she walked through the door with her suitcase and her succulent was, "Baby, what happened to you?" "Nothing," Camille said. "I'm fine. I just needed a change." Her mother looked at her for a long moment with the particular expression of a woman who has successfully raised a human being and therefore cannot be deceived by one. "Sit down," her mother said. "I'll make tea." "I don't need, Camille, sit down." She sat down. She hadn't cried yet. She'd been managing the grief the way she managed everything else. Systematically, efficiently, making sure it didn't interfere with her functioning. She had a system. She had always had a system. She held it together through the tea. Through the first 20 minutes of gentle questions, through her mother asking about Seoul, about the company, about her apartment, about whether she was eating. Then her mother asked, very quietly, "When was the last time someone took care of you?" And Camille, who was sitting at a kitchen table where she had done homework as a child, who was holding a mug that had been in this house longer than she'd been alive, who had spent 6 years making herself irreplaceable in a world where she had still somehow ended up invisible, Camille put her mug down. And finally, after 11 drafts and 4 weeks and 11 hours on a plane and 3 years of getting it together, she stopped getting it together. In Seoul, the empire continued its grinding deterioration. Adrian hired a replacement. Her name was Ms. Park, and she was technically excellent, organized, intelligent, professionally flawless. She lasted 6 weeks before she submitted her own resignation, citing irreconcilable differences in communication style, which everyone understood was a diplomatic way of saying that Adrian had expected her to be Camille, and had made that expectation clear in ways that were neither kind nor conscious. He hired 2 more people after that, a scheduling coordinator and a communications director, split between them the responsibilities that Camille had handled alone. It helped. The grinding eased somewhat. Meetings ran closer to on time, but the texture of things had changed. Adrian became aware of this slowly, in the accumulation of small moments. There was no one to tell him, quietly, that he'd been condescending in a meeting. There was no one who knew that the Singapore investor's daughter was at Yonsei and appreciated when he remembered. There was no one who understood that the particular quality of silence that settled over him during certain negotiations was not confidence. It was the prelude to a decision he hadn't fully thought through yet, and who knew to buy him exactly 11 minutes before the room was called back to order. His cousin Su Yeon noticed. She always noticed everything, which was both her most useful quality and her most exhausting one. "You're different," she said, 3 months after Camille's departure, over dinner at a restaurant that he had arrived at 7 minutes late because no one had anticipated traffic. "I'm fine," he said. "You're not sleeping." "I sleep." "You missed the Daejeon conference call this morning." He had. His scheduling coordinator had put it on the wrong calendar, and nobody had caught the error. "It's been handled." "Adrian," she put down her chopsticks, "when did you last have a conversation with someone who actually challenged you?" He started to answer and then stopped, because the honest answer was uncomfortable. "She wasn't just your assistant," Su Yeon said. Her voice was matter-of-fact, not unkind. "You don't miss the function, do you? You could buy that. You basically already did. 3 times. She picked up her chopsticks again. "You miss her." He didn't respond to that. "She was the safest place in your life," Su Yeon continued, with the particular cruelty of someone telling a truth they find slightly too satisfying. "And you had no idea because you never thought to ask." The food arrived. They ate in silence. That night, in the back of his car heading back to his apartment, Adrian Huang, a man who had built a $40 billion empire on the belief that every problem had a logical solution, stared out the window at the Seoul lights and felt, for the first time in as long as he could remember, genuinely lost. He reached for his phone, started to open her contact, stopped. He didn't know what he would say. He wasn't even certain yet what he felt, only that the absence had a shape now. Specific, detailed, familiar, and that he had been confusing efficiency with something else for a very long time. He put the phone away. Outside, Seoul moved past the window, indifferent and bright, and somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, on a one-way ticket to Atlanta, the woman who had made his empire human was sleeping next to a succulent named Gerald, and had no idea that the man she had finally walked away from was just now, far too late and far too slowly, beginning to understand what he had lost. What he didn't know, couldn't have known, was that in 4 months, fate would place them both in the same ballroom in Seoul, and that the woman who walked through those doors would not be the woman he remembered. She would be someone he had never truly met, and that would change everything. The gala was held at the Grand Hyatt Seoul on a Friday night in late March, 4 months and 11 days after Camille Brooks walked out of HWG Group with a succulent under her arm and didn't look back. Adrian hadn't wanted to attend. He'd made that clear to Su Yeon 3 times over the course of 2 weeks, each time with increasing firmness, and each time she had responded by simply not canceling his RSVP. The event was the International Cultural Exchange Foundation's annual fundraising gala. Black tie, 300 guests, the kind of room where old money and new ambition shook hands over champagne and called it philanthropy. Adrian had attended every year for the past 5 years because HWG Group was a primary sponsor, and his absence would generate exactly the kind of speculation he didn't have the patience to manage. So he went. He arrived 7 minutes late, which used to never happen, shook the necessary hands at the entrance, accepted a glass of champagne he had no intention of drinking, and began the familiar calculus of how quickly he could complete the required social circuit and leave. He was mid-conversation with a shipping magnate from Busan, nodding at something about container logistics when the energy in the room shifted. It was subtle, the kind of thing most people wouldn't notice. A slight recalibration of attention near the main entrance, heads turning in that particular way that meant someone had walked in and disrupted the ambient social current. Adrian didn't turn immediately. He finished his sentence with the shipping magnate, excused himself with the appropriate warmth, and then, casually, as though he was simply scanning the room, turned toward the entrance. And stopped. She was wearing deep burgundy. Not a dramatic gown, something with clean lines and a quiet confidence to its cut, the kind of dress that didn't announce itself. Her hair was different, worn down instead of the low professional knot he'd seen on her every day for 6 years. She was speaking to someone near the door, a woman Camille's age who was clearly an old friend, and she was laughing at something, genuinely laughing, her head tilting back slightly, completely unaware that anyone was watching her. Adrian's champagne glass stopped halfway to his mouth. He had seen Camille Brooks walk into rooms approximately 10,000 times. He had never once seen her look like that. It wasn't the dress. It wasn't the hair. It was something underneath those things, a quality of ease, of ownership, as though she had finally moved into herself completely and was no longer apologizing for taking up space. She looked like someone who had put something down that had been very heavy and whose body still remembered the relief. He stood there for a moment too long, glass suspended, staring. Su-Yan materialized at his elbow from nowhere, as she always did. "Close your mouth," she said pleasantly, reaching out and gently redirecting his champagne glass downward. "I wasn't. You were." She took a sip of her own champagne. 4 months, Adrian. You should have called her." She didn't want to be called. "No," Su-Yan agreed. "She wanted you to call her anyway. There's a difference." She nodded in Camille's direction. "Go say hello. You look like a man watching his house burn down from across the street." He said nothing, but he didn't look away. Camille saw him first. That was the thing she hadn't prepared for. Despite knowing he would almost certainly be here, HWG Group's name was on the sponsorship board at the entrance, which she had clocked immediately and then spent 5 minutes in the women's restroom reminding herself that she was fine. She was different now. She had done the work. She could stand in the same room as Adrian Huang and feel exactly nothing. She had prepared for many things. She had not prepared for the way he looked when he was staring at her and didn't know she could see him. He looked undone was too strong a word, but there was something around the edges of him that was different. Some piece of the armor that usually sat so perfectly had shifted, and it made him look for just a moment like a person instead of a performance. She squared her shoulders and turned back to her conversation. Ji Young, her friend from her university days in the States, was looking at her with an expression of undisguised fascination. "That man over there," she said. "The one in the charcoal suit, is that—" "Yes." "He's been staring at you for about 45 seconds. "I know. And you're not going to—" "Ji Young. I know." Camille picked up her water glass. "I know exactly what you're going to say, and the answer is that I'm going to finish this conversation with you. And then I'm going to make the rounds. And then I'm going to find Chairman Lee and discuss the Cultural Preservation Initiative, because that is why I am here tonight." Ji Young looked at the man in the charcoal suit, looked back at Camille. "He's coming over." Camille felt it before she heard the footsteps. A change in air pressure, something she had spent 6 years becoming attuned to against her better judgment. She turned. Adrian stopped approximately 3 feet away. Not too close. Measured, as always. "Camille?" he said. And there it was. Her name in his voice, which had not changed at all, and against which she had apparently not built sufficient defenses despite 4 months of therapy and considerable personal effort. "Mr. Huang," she said. Something crossed his face, quick, almost invisible. Then, "You look well." "Thank you. So do you." A beat. Ji Young had developed a sudden intense interest in something on the other side of the room and evaporated gracefully. "I didn't know you'd be in Seoul," Adrian said. "I'm consulting for the foundation through the end of the month. Cultural Programming Development." She kept her voice even, professional, the voice she'd practiced for 6 years. "I'm surprised to see you here without a security detail." "I came without one tonight." He paused. "I've been doing that more often. Apparently I've been relying on certain systems for too long." The word systems landed between them with a small, specific weight. That's a healthy change, she said neutrally. He looked at her. Not the way he used to look at her. Processing information, calculating next moves. Something slower, something that didn't immediately know what to do with itself. Are you happy? He asked. Here. In general, are you... He stopped, started again. How are you? It wasn't really a question the way he said it. It was something more uncomfortable than a question. I'm good, she said. And then because it was true, and because she had earned the right to say it, I'm genuinely good, Adrian. The first name slipped out. She saw him register it, the slight shift in his posture, the way his jaw moved. I'm glad, he said quietly. He didn't look glad. He looked like a man who had just been told the plane he missed landed safely and was working out how to feel about that. She excused herself politely, walked away at a pace that was deliberate and unhurried, did not look back. In the women's restroom 3 minutes later, she braced both hands on the sink and stared at her own reflection for a long moment. You're fine, she told herself. She was fine. She was almost completely fine. They crossed paths twice more that evening. Once at the silent auction table, where they both reached for the same item description card, a cultural heritage photography collection, and their hands didn't quite touch, but came close enough that she felt the proximity as a specific thing, a warmth near the back of her hand that had no business being there. Sorry, he said, pulling back. You go ahead, she said. No, you... Adrian. She looked at him directly. Look at the card. He looked at it. It was a collection focused on traditional Korean textile arts. He had approximately zero interest in traditional textile arts. Right, he said. Right. The second time was near the exit, as she was getting her coat. He was speaking with a group of Foundation board members, but his attention had a particular quality of elsewhere, and when she glanced across the room, she found his eyes already on her. She looked away first, but it took a second. It took a full second, and she noticed that, and she stored it in the part of herself that she was still working on, and she went back to her hotel. The Foundation's Seoul offices were on the 14th floor of a building in Gangnam, clean-lined and well-lit, and nothing like the aggressive architectural confidence of HWG Group's tower. Camille had been working there for 2 weeks when her phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon, and the caller ID read a number she hadn't deleted. She stared at it through 2 full rings, picked up. Adrian, I know you're busy. His voice was different on the phone. The performance quality dropped slightly without eye contact to maintain. He sounded tired. I won't take long. I wanted to... A pause. I wanted to apologize. She sat back in her chair. For what specifically? I don't entirely know yet. I'm still working that out. Another pause. That's not a good answer. No, she agreed. It isn't. I know. She could hear him exhale. A long, reluctant exhale, the kind that preceded something he didn't want to say. Camille, the night you resigned, I want to understand... Adrian, I'm not asking you to come back. I need you to understand that. I know that's not... He stopped. I've been trying to figure out what happened, and I can't figure it out, and that bothers me, and I know I don't have the right to ask you to help me understand it, but I'm asking anyway. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside her window, Seoul moved through its afternoon, indifferent and busy. You called me a load-bearing wall, she said finally. Silence. Not to me, she continued. To Tae-jun. I overheard you. I wasn't... She stopped. It doesn't matter how I heard it. The point is I heard it, and it wasn't wrong. Everything you said was accurate. She pressed her fingers against her temple. I had been operating under a different understanding of what I was to you, and when I realized that understanding was incorrect, I had to make a decision. More silence. Longer. What understanding? He said. Very quiet. Don't, she said. Don't make me say it on the phone, Adrian. Camille, I have to get back to work, she said. But thank you for calling. I mean that. She hung up. She put the phone face down on her desk, pressed both palms flat against the desk surface, and breathed slowly, in and out, until the tight thing in her chest loosened enough to function. Then she picked up her pen and went back to work. He showed up at the foundation's lobby 3 days later. She got the call from the front desk at 2:17 p.m. "Ms. Brooks, there's a Mr. Huang here asking if you have a few minutes." She closed her eyes for approximately 2 seconds. Then, "Send him up." He looked like he hadn't slept. Not badly. He still looked like himself, still wore it well. But there were lines around his eyes that she recognized from his worst deadline weeks, and his posture had that particular quality of someone operating on will rather than rest. She met him in the small conference room off the main hall, didn't offer coffee, sat across the table from him because sitting beside him felt inadvisable. "You didn't have to come here," she said. "I know." He sat down, looked at the table, then at her. "I've been thinking about what you said, what understanding." "Adrian, I think I know what understanding." He said it carefully. Not smoothly, carefully, the way a person says something they've been rehearsing and discarding versions of for days. "And I think I need to ask you directly whether I'm right, because I've been getting things wrong about you for a long time, and I don't want to get this wrong too." She said nothing. She had kept her face neutral with considerable effort. "Did you—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "Were your feelings for me—" Another stop. He pushed through it. "Was there something you didn't tell me? For a long time?" The room was very quiet. "Yes," she said. One word, flat and clean. He absorbed that. His hands were on the table, still, and she watched his knuckles very briefly whiten against the surface. "How long?" he said. "Long enough that the number doesn't matter." "Camille, Adrian." Her voice was harder now, not cruel but load-bearing in its own way, and she saw him feel it. "What do you want from this conversation? Because if you want me to feel bad about it, I don't. Not anymore. If you want me to pretend it didn't happen, I won't. And if you came here because you've decided, now that I'm no longer available, that you— That's not why I came." "Then why?" He looked at her. For a long, unguarded moment, he just looked at her, and she kept her eyes on his and waited, and the afternoon light through the conference room window sat flat and honest between them. "I don't know yet," he said finally. "I came because I don't know. And I've never not known something this long." It was the most honest thing she'd ever heard him say. It was also, she recognized with something close to exhaustion, deeply insufficient. "Then I need you to figure it out somewhere that isn't my workplace," she said. "Because I have built something here. I've built myself back, and it took longer than I want to admit, and I can't afford to, She stopped. Restarted. "I can't afford to let you be unclear in my direction, Adrian. It's too expensive." He stood, nodded once, a tight, controlled movement. He was almost to the door when she said quietly, "For what it's worth, I don't regret it. Any of it. Not even the bad parts." He stopped with his hand on the doorframe. "I do," he said. "I regret a lot of it." He left. The next 6 weeks moved in a rhythm she hadn't expected. He called twice a week. Not always about anything significant. Sometimes it was a question about a foundation contact she'd maintained from her HWG days, a reasonable professional inquiry. But the calls ran long, longer than professional inquiry required. They talked about the foundation's programming. They talked about his company's new sustainability initiative, which she told him flatly was 6 months behind where it should be, and he argued with her for 15 minutes, and then went quiet in the particular way that meant she was right. They talked about other things too, slowly, carefully. She told him about Atlanta, about her mother's kitchen, about sitting at that table at 2 a.m. with her feelings finally in front of her instead of managed behind her, and understanding for the first time in years that she had been disappearing herself incrementally and calling it professionalism. He told her about the first month after she left, stilted and spare, the way he talked about anything that cost him something, but honest in its sparseness. He told her the Singapore meeting had gone badly. He told her he'd sat in his office at 6 a.m. on multiple mornings with his phone in his hand, not knowing who to call, which for a man who had never not known exactly who to call, felt, he said, like a particular kind of freefall. She didn't tell him that hearing that made something ache in her chest, not with grief, with something more complicated. She was careful. She kept careful accounts of what she was feeling, and she reviewed them regularly in therapy, and she did not let the warmth of his voice in the evening rebuild anything without her explicit consent. It was working. She was managing it. And then she got the call from New York. The offer came from the International Cultural Advancement Initiative, a newly established organization with serious backing and a mandate she had been quietly dreaming about for her entire career, building the largest cross-cultural exchange program in the Western Hemisphere, based in New York, with a budget and a scope and a degree of creative authority she had never been given before. The director who called her, a woman named Dr. Anita Reyes, was direct and unhurried and spoke about the role the way people speak about things they believe in completely. The salary was extraordinary. The timeline was 6 months to launch. They wanted her to build the team from scratch, shape the programming, and put her name on something that would exist beyond her. Camille sat in her apartment for 3 hours after that call and stared at the wall. This was the version of her life she had been choosing herself toward for 4 months. This was the job she would have dreamed about in the quiet moments between impossible deadlines, when she let herself imagine a future that was hers instead of an architecture built around someone else's needs. She accepted. 3 days later, before she told anyone else, she told Adrian. She met him for coffee. His suggestion, a small place in Irawan he'd texted her about, casual, neutral ground. She got there before him, which was new. He arrived 2 minutes late, which was also new, and she noted both. She told him about the offer. She told him about New York. She told him she had accepted. He went very still. Not the stillness of processing data. Different. The stillness of a person suddenly confronted with a weight they hadn't braced for. New York, he repeated. Yes. Full relocation. Yes. He picked up his coffee cup, put it down without drinking. His eyes moved to the window, then back to her, and in that transit she saw something cross his face that she recognized from the airport lounge 2 years ago, that night flight from Geneva, when she had looked up and seen him finally human. When, he said. 8 weeks. The word 8 sat between them like something with edges. He looked at her for a long time. She held his gaze because she had learned, finally, to stop looking away first. And in his eyes she saw the beginning of something. A reckoning, slow and visible, the kind that arrived too late and knew it. Take it, he said. She blinked. What? Take it. His voice was steady. His hands were very still on the table. It's everything you should want. Take it. She stared at him. He was not, she realized, being generous. He was being honest, and the honesty was more devastating than any other response he could have given, because it meant he understood, finally, too late, clearly, what she had needed for 6 years, and he was choosing, for the first time, to give it to her without being asked. Okay, she said softly. I will. Outside the window, Seoul continued its relentless momentum, and Camille Brooks, who had spent 6 years becoming indispensable, 4 months learning to become herself, and 8 weeks away from crossing an ocean toward the life she had built from the ground up, looked at the man across from her who had just told her to go, and understood, with a clarity that felt like something breaking and something else being born, that she was not entirely sure she wanted to, but she was going anyway. In 8 weeks, and for the first time since she'd walked away, he was running out of time. 8 weeks sounds like a long time until it isn't. Camille learned this the hard way, the way she seemed to learn most things, by moving through them at full speed and only understanding the cost afterward. The first 2 weeks after the coffee shop were manageable. She had logistics to occupy her, paperwork for the foundation's sole contract conclusion, apartment sublet arrangements, the particular administrative grief of dismantling a temporary life in a city where she had never fully unpacked. She kept busy with the efficiency of a woman who understood that stillness was dangerous right now, that if she stopped moving long enough to feel the full weight of what she was leaving, she might make a decision she wasn't ready to make. Adrian called on a Tuesday, their second call since the coffee shop. How's the packing? He said. I don't have that much. I never fully settled in here. A pause. That's a sad thing to say. It's just true. Another pause, longer. She could hear him thinking, that particular quality of silence that meant he was assembling something he wasn't sure he should say. I've been talking to Soo Yan, he said finally, about a lot of things. A breath. About the last 6 years. About the way I operate. She's been... She's not gentle about it. Camille almost smiled. No, she wouldn't be. She said I treat people like systems until they break and then I'm surprised when they stop working. He said it flatly, without self-pity, reporting a diagnosis rather than performing remorse. She's probably right. She's completely right, Camille said. A short exhale, not quite a laugh. You didn't even hesitate. Adrian, I spent 6 years watching you do it. You're brilliant and you're good at your work and you genuinely care about outcomes, but you categorize people. You put them in functional roles in your head and you stop seeing them once they're filed. She kept her voice even. You did it to me. You probably still do it to most people. Silence. I know, he said. 2 words. No deflection, no counterargument. She pressed the phone against her ear and stared at the ceiling of her half-packed apartment and felt the shape of the conversation like something she was holding very carefully, trying not to drop. That's new, she said. The knowing without arguing. I've had time, he said, and I'm trying to... He stopped. Started again. I'm not good at this. No, she agreed. You're not. I'm going to get better at it. She didn't answer immediately. Outside, Seoul was doing its evening thing. The street vendors, the distant traffic, the particular urban frequency she'd grown to recognize in her months here. Adrian, she said carefully, why are you telling me this? The silence that followed was different from his thinking silences. This one had a texture, something held in it. I don't know how to answer that yet, he said. Is that an acceptable answer? It's an honest one. Okay, a pause. Can I call you Thursday? Yes, she said. You can call me Thursday. She hung up and sat on the floor of her half-packed apartment and had a very direct, very firm conversation with herself about what she was doing and what she was allowing and how certain she was that she was making decisions from her rebuilt self, rather than from the version of herself that had spent years hoping for exactly this quality of attention. The conversation with herself was not entirely convincing. The twist arrived on a Wednesday, at 4:47 in the afternoon, in the form of a woman named Yeon-jae Shin. Camille was at the foundation offices, finalizing her transition documents, when Ji-young appeared in her doorway with an expression that meant she had information she was not sure how to deliver. Ji-young was a woman of considerable social fluency and very little hesitation, so an expression of genuine uncertainty on her face was its own alarm system. What? Camille said. There's something I need to show you. Ji-young set her phone on the desk, screen up. It's from this morning, the entertainment desk at Seoul Business Daily. She stopped. I didn't want to be the person who showed you this, but I also couldn't not. Camille looked at the phone. The headline read, HWG Group's Adrian Huang spotted dining with Shin Yeon-jae for 3rd consecutive week. Insider sources suggest the relationship is developing into something serious. Below the headline was a photograph. Clear, professionally shot, the kind that came from a telephoto lens at a restaurant across the street. Adrian at a table. A woman across from him. Dark hair, elegant, early 40s, the kind of composed beauty that announced old family money without needing to say a word. They were leaning in slightly, the posture of people deep in conversation. His face had something on it she recognized. Attention. Real, focused attention. The timestamp on the photograph was last Saturday, 2 days after their coffee shop conversation where he had told her to take the New York job. Camille looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she picked up the phone and read the article. Shin Yeon-jae, daughter of Shin Group's founding family, recently returned from a decade in London, currently restructuring her family's cultural investments. The article described her as a natural match for Huang's world and quoted an unnamed source close to both families who said the meetings had begun professionally and evolved into something more personal over the past month. A month. The past month in which Adrian had been calling Camille twice a week and telling her he was working on knowing himself better and asking if he could call her Thursday. She set Ji-young's phone down, picked up her own, looked at Adrian's name in her contacts. Camille, Ji-young said. Careful. Watchful. I'm fine, Camille said. You don't have to... I'm fine. She set her phone face down on the desk. pressed the heel of her hand briefly against her sternum, where the tight thing had arrived, abrupt and structural, like a load-bearing wall deciding to shift. I need 5 minutes. Ji-young left and closed the door behind her. In the silence, Camille sat very straight in her chair and did the accounting she was good at, the one that lived underneath all the professional competence. The cold, honest tally of what she actually felt versus what she was telling herself she felt. What she felt was a specific variety of humiliation she recognized from the night of the overheard conversation in the executive lounge. The sensation of having misread something important, of having constructed a narrative from available materials and discovered the narrative was fiction. He had been seeing someone, seriously, apparently, for a month, while calling her, while sitting across from her in a coffee shop and looking at her with that particular expression she had been very carefully not assigning meaning to. He had told her to take the New York job. He had told her to take it the day after, presumably his third dinner with Shin Yeon-jae. She picked up her phone, opened his contact, typed, "I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer the same way. Are you seeing someone?" She stared at it, sent it. The response came in 4 minutes. She watched the minutes pass on her screen's clock with the particular stillness of someone who has reached the outer edge of what controlled breathing can manage. "Where did you see that?" Not a denial. She called him. He picked up on the second ring. "Camille, I asked you a direct question." Her voice surprised her. It was steady, very steady. "Answer it." A breath on his end. "It's more complicated than—" "Adrian." She heard the edge come into her voice and let it. Don't give me complicated right now. It is a yes or no question." "Yes," he said, then immediately. "But it's not—" "How long?" Silence. "How long, Adrian?" "A month, 6 weeks." His voice was careful, controlled. She recognized the register. It was his negotiation voice, and the fact that he was using it with her right now made something in her chest turn to something harder and colder than grief. It started professionally. Her family approached HWG about a joint venture, and she was managing their side of the— "I don't need the origin story," she said. "I need to understand what the last 6 weeks have been. The phone calls, the coffee. What you said in the coffee shop." She stopped, made herself continue. "Was any of that real, or were you—" She couldn't finish that sentence. Tried a different one. "What were you doing?" "I wasn't— Camille, I wasn't lying to you. You were calling me twice a week and telling me you were figuring yourself out while you were seeing someone else." Her voice was flat now, the flatness that came after the edge, which was always more frightening. "What exactly is the part that isn't lying?" "I told you I didn't know what I wanted yet. I told you I couldn't answer certain things. That was true. That is the most Adrian Huang sentence you have ever said to me, and I mean that as an indictment." She stood up from her desk, walked to the window. Soul outside, the same as always, indifferent. "You were managing your uncertainty by keeping me accessible while you explored another option. You told me to take a job on another continent while you figured out whether the other option was working. Do you understand what that is? Do you understand what you were doing?" Silence. Long. The kind that meant he did understand. "Yes," he said, quiet. "Say it back to me." A beat, 2. He stopped. "I was hedging. I didn't want to lose access to you while I was—" Another stop. "That's not—" "Say it, Adrian." "I was keeping you available," he said finally, low and stripped, "while I figured out if I wanted something else. And I didn't tell you because telling you would have required me to make a decision, and I—" His voice did something she had never heard it do, something close to breaking. "I didn't know how to make the decision." The office was very quiet. Camille looked at her own reflection in the window glass, faint and translucent against the Seoul skyline. She looked at herself and she thought about the woman who had stood at a different window, in a different city, 4 months ago, and decided to stop disappearing. "I rebuilt myself," she said. Her voice was soft now, which was worse than the edge, she knew. She knew he knew. "I went home and I fell apart properly for the first time in years, and then I built myself back piece by piece, and I made a decision about who I was going to be next. I made a life. I have a job. I have a future that belongs to me. She turned away from the window. And you have spent the last 6 weeks making me doubt it. Not on purpose, I think. You never do these things on purpose, Adrian. You just do them. Camille, I'm going to New York, she said. I know. I don't want you to call me again before I go. A long pause. Okay. And I need you to understand that I'm not saying that to punish you. I'm saying it because I cannot afford to. She pressed her hand against her sternum again. The tight thing was still there. You're expensive, she said. You have always been expensive, and I can't afford to keep paying the price. She hung up. She told Ji Young she was leaving for the day. She walked out of the foundation building into the sharp spring air of Seoul and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. People moving around her in the evening rush, nobody looking at her, nobody requiring anything from her. Just a woman standing on a sidewalk, holding herself together with the particular discipline of someone who had done it before and knew the technique. She called her mother. 3 rings. Baby. Hi, Mom. A pause. Her mother could read her voice the way other people read documents. What happened? Nothing catastrophic, Camille said. I just needed to hear your voice. Where are you? Standing on a street in Seoul. Come inside somewhere. It's cold. I will. In a minute. She watched a couple pass her, arguing quietly, their faces close. Mom, am I… She stopped, started differently. Did I make the right call? New York. All of it. What's making you question it? Just something. She moved aside to let a group of teenagers pass. Something that reminded me that I can do everything right and still end up in the same place. Her mother was quiet for a moment, then, Camille, where is the same place? She thought about it. About the executive lounge and the overheard conversation, about the resignation letter and Atlanta and therapy and the ballroom and the coffee shop and the article on Ji Young's phone and Adrian's voice saying I was keeping you available. Somewhere I didn't choose, she said finally. Then choose, her mother said simply. You already know how. You've been doing it for 4 months. She stood on the sidewalk for another minute after they hung up, watched the city, felt the cold. Then she went inside because her mother had told her to, and bought herself a very large coffee, and sat at a table by the window, and opened her New York contract on her laptop, and read every page of it with the focus of someone who was reminding herself, word by word, that she had already chosen. She had chosen herself. She was going to keep choosing herself, even when it cost this much. She didn't hear from Adrian for 5 days. On the 6th day, a package arrived at the foundation's reception desk addressed to her in handwriting she recognized. Inside, a book on New York's cultural history, a small card that said only, "For the beginning of something that belongs to you entirely." And underneath the book, wrapped in tissue paper, a replacement succulent in a simple white pot. The card attached to the succulent read, "His name is Gerald II. The first one was irreplaceable. This one just has to try." She sat with the package in the foundation's mailroom for longer than she intended. She cried, briefly and privately, in a way that wasn't grief and wasn't forgiveness and wasn't anything she had a clean word for yet. Then she packed Gerald II carefully into her carry-on because she was not leaving him behind. She was leaving in 48 hours. And Adrian Huang, who had sent a succulent instead of himself, who had spent a month learning too late what he was actually feeling, who had managed her the way he managed everything, as a resource, a variable, a thing to be optimized until the moment he understood she was none of those things, was standing in his office on the 43rd floor of HWG Group, watching the sun come down over Seoul, and finally, admitting to himself what his cousin had told him months ago, what the empty desk had told him on the first morning, what every failed replacement and every 6 a.m. silence had been telling him in the particular brutal language of consequences. That he was out of time, that he had spent 6 years looking at the most important person in his life and seeing a function. That sentence finished itself in his head at 11:43 p.m. on a Tuesday, 47 hours before Camille Brooks's flight to New York, and Adrian Huang sat down on the floor of his office, not in his chair, not on the couch, on the actual floor, back against the cold glass of the window, and let it land with its full weight for the first time. Not a system, Not a load-bearing wall, not an operational asset or an institutional repository, or any of the other bloodless vocabulary he had used to describe the architecture of his own emotional cowardice. A person. The person. The one who had known him better than anyone and had still chosen every morning for 6 years to show up. Until she didn't. Until he made it impossible. His phone was in his hand. Her number was on the screen. He had opened the contact 4 times in the last 3 hours and closed it 4 times, and each time the gap between opening and closing had gotten shorter, which meant he was either building towards something or spiraling, and he was no longer certain there was a meaningful difference. He called Su Yan instead. She picked up on the 3rd ring, voice sharp with the alertness of someone who hadn't been asleep. What? She leaves in 2 days. I know. He stopped, pressed the back of his head against the glass. Outside, Seoul was doing its nighttime thing. The lights, the movement, the city's absolute indifference to the particular crisis of one man on one floor of one tower. I don't know what I'm doing. Yes, you do, Su-yeon said. You're just scared. I handled it wrong. The Yeonji situation. I handled it wrong and I hurt her and she has every reason to… Adrian, her voice cut through it. I'm going to ask you something and I need you to actually answer it. Not the managed version, the real one. What? If she gets on that plane and you never see her again, not professionally, not accidentally, just never, can you live with that? The answer arrived before he finished processing the question. It came from somewhere below thought, from the place where the things you actually know live, underneath all the things you've decided to know instead. No, he said. Silence on the line. Then stop calling me, Su-yeon said, and go do something about it. She hung up. He called Yeonjae at midnight. She picked up without surprise, which told him she had been expecting the call, possibly for longer than he had been prepared to make it. I know, she said, before he could begin. He exhaled. Yeonjae, you don't have to explain it. Her voice was composed in the way of someone who had already done their own accounting and arrived at a number they could live with. I knew going in that you were… A brief pause. Unresolved. I thought it was something you'd work through. I was perhaps optimistic. I should have been more honest with you, from the beginning. Yes, she agreed, cleanly, without cruelty. You should have, but I also wasn't asking the right questions because I didn't want the answers. A short silence. She must be extraordinary. He didn't answer immediately, thought about the word. Extraordinary was too large and too general. It didn't capture the specific thing, the particular quality of Camille that he had spent 6 years failing to name, because naming it would have required him to do something about it. She's the most honest person I've ever been around, he said finally. It's uncomfortable. She makes me uncomfortable. She always has. He paused. I think I mistook the discomfort for something else, for a long time. Yeonjae was quiet for a moment. Take care of yourself, Adrian. You too. I'm sorry. I know. A pause. Go fix it. She hung up. He sat on the floor for another 10 minutes. Then he stood up, because sitting on the floor was not going to get Camille Brooks to miss her flight, and he had approximately 46 hours and a significant amount of damage to address. And Adrian Huang had built a $40 billion company from a mid-sized family business in 11 years, which meant that when he finally decided to do something, he was not slow about it. He texted her at 12:23 a.m. I need to see you. Not to ask you to stay. Not to make this harder. I just need to say certain things to your face before you go, and I'm asking you to let me. He watched the screen. No response. He put the phone in his pocket and started moving. The problem was she wasn't at her apartment. He knew this because he went there first. Took a car, arrived at 1:15 a.m., rang the intercom, got no response. Her building's night security guard, a man he had never met but who clearly recognized him from some combination of news coverage and the particular energy of a man in an expensive coat standing outside a residential building at 1 a.m., informed him politely that Ms. Brooks had not been in since late afternoon. He called Ji Young. He had Ji Young's number from a foundation contact sheet Camille had shared months ago, and he was aware that calling her was a significant social transgression that would be reported back in full, and he called anyway. Ji Young picked up after 6 rings, her voice carrying the particular texture of someone who had been awake and waiting for exactly this call. "She's not with me," she said without preamble. "I know. Do you know where she is?" "Why should I tell you?" "Because I need to say something to her that I should have said a year ago, and I'm running out of time to say it." A pause. Long enough that he understood she was making a genuine calculation, weighing her loyalty to Camille against her assessment of his intentions, running her own internal risk analysis with the efficiency of a woman who had been Camille's friend long enough to understand the territory. "She goes to the Han River when she needs to think," Ji-young said finally. "There's a bench near the Mapo Bridge walkway, east side. She found it her first week in Seoul and she goes there." A beat. "Don't make me regret this." "I won't," he said. "That's what people always say." She hung up. The Han River at 1:30 a.m. in late spring had a particular quality of stillness that the city never managed during daylight hours. The water absorbed the ambient light of the bridges, held it diffusely, turned it into something softer than Seoul usually allowed. The walkway was nearly empty. A few late joggers, a couple walking a dog, the specific population of people who needed the river at this hour for their own private reasons. He found her on the bench Ji-young had described. She was sitting with her knees together, a paper cup of something warm held in both hands, looking at the water. She was wearing a dark jacket over what looked like the clothes she'd had on at work, and her hair was down, and she didn't turn when she heard his footsteps because, he realized, she had already heard them coming, had already recognized them, and had made the decision to keep looking at the river. He sat down on the other end of the bench, not beside her, the far end, left a deliberate distance between them. For a moment, neither of them said anything. "Ji-young," she said. "Ji-young." She nodded, took a sip from her cup. "It's almost 2 in the morning. I know." "My flight is at 7 a.m. I know." She turned and looked at him then, and in the river light her expression was doing something complicated. Not anger, not grief, something beyond both of those that he recognized as the particular exhaustion of a person who has been managing their own emotions for too long and has finally stopped pretending the management is free. "Adrian, let me go first," he said. "Please, just let me go first." She looked at him for another second, then she turned back to the water. "Okay." He had rehearsed this in the car. He had assembled the words in the right order, had considered the architecture of what he needed to say and how to say it without it collapsing into the vocabulary of a man who wanted something rather than a man who understood something. He had been precise and deliberate and organized. He opened his mouth and none of the rehearsed version came out. "I have been afraid of you," he said, "since approximately the 2nd year of working together." She didn't move. Not afraid of you specifically, afraid of what I felt when you were in a room, because it was different from every other thing in my life, and I didn't have a category for it, and I didn't want one, because categories require acknowledgement, and acknowledgement requires... He stopped, pressed his jaw together. "It requires being willing to lose control of the outcome." The river moved. A light from a bridge crossed the water slowly. "I have never in my professional life made a decision without knowing the outcome first," he said. "I don't bet on uncertain things. I build certainty, and then I act. And you..." His voice shifted. She heard it shift. He knew she heard it. "You were the most uncertain thing I had ever encountered, because I couldn't make you certain. I couldn't optimize what I felt or predict it or manage it into something I could file and move on from. So I filed you as something else instead, something I could control the category of. And I am telling you..." He stopped again. Harder stop. "I am telling you that I know what that cost you. I know exactly what it cost you, and I didn't know it at the time, and that is the one part of this I cannot fix, and it is the part I will carry the longest." Silence. The jogger passed them. The river absorbed the light. "The Yunjae situation," he said. "I need you to understand what that was. Not to excuse it. I know it's not excusable. But I need you to understand it. She was..." He worked through the words carefully. "She was comprehensible. She was a known quantity in a way that you have never been. And I was trying to find a version of this." He gestured at the space between them. "A version of this that I could manage, that I could predict, that wouldn't cost me what I understood you would cost me, which is the complete and total abandonment of the idea that I can control how this goes." Camille still hadn't turned. He could see the line of her jaw, the stillness of her hands around the cup. "I don't love her," he said. I want to be exact about that. I care about her and I handled it badly, and I owe her a better accounting of myself than I gave. But it was not love. I know the difference now. The difference is that when I'm with her, I can breathe normally. He paused. And when I'm with you, I can't. She turned then, slowly. Her eyes were dry. She was not performing anything. She was just looking at him with the full weight of everything she knew, which was more than almost any other person in his life had ever accumulated. That is the worst romantic declaration I have ever heard, she said. Something released in his chest. Not everything, but something. I know, he said. I'm working on it. You told me you can't breathe. In a good way. Adrian. She looked at the river, back at him. What are you asking me? And here it was. The question. The one he had driven across Seoul at 1 a.m. to answer, and the answer was the most structurally unsound thing he had committed to in 11 years of building things he didn't commit to until he was certain they'd hold. I'm not asking you to stay, he said. The New York job is yours and it should be yours, and I would rather cut off my own arm than be the reason you don't take it. He held her gaze. I'm asking for the chance to prove that I finally understand what I'm feeling, and that I will not manage it into something convenient ever again. I'm asking you to let me, I don't know. I'm asking you to not close the door when you leave. She looked at him for a long time. He held the look, didn't perform confidence he didn't have, didn't smooth the edges, just sat on the bench in the 2 a.m. light of the Han River, a man who was out of armor and out of vocabulary and out of time, offering the only thing he had left, the unmanaged, unoptimized, undeniably terrifying truth of what she meant to him, with no guarantee attached. I'm so tired, she said softly. Not to him. To herself, maybe. Or to the river. I'm so tired of being brave about you. I know, he said. You hurt me. She said it simply, flatly, not to wound him, just because it was true and she was done not saying true things. Not once, repeatedly, over years. And the worst part isn't the obvious parts. The worst part is that most of it wasn't intentional, which means I can't even be cleanly angry about it. I just have to... She stopped. Her jaw tightened. I just have to carry it. I know. Stop saying I know. For the first time, heat came into her voice. Brief, but real. Because if you had known, Adrian, if you had actually known, we would not be sitting on a bench at 2 a.m. while I have 5 hours before my flight. He took that. Took all of it. The heat, and the truth, and the weight she'd been carrying, and had just put down in front of him. And he did not deflect or counter-argue or reach for the negotiation register. You're right, he said. I should have seen it. I should have seen you. And I didn't, until seeing you was almost past tense, and there is no version of that I can justify. Her hands around the cup had gone tight. He could see the whites of her knuckles in the bridge light. Gerald II is in my carry-on, she said suddenly. He blinked. Good. I'm not leaving him behind. Good, he said again, softer. She looked at the river. He looked at her looking at the river, and there was something in the quality of the silence now that was different from all the silences before. Not empty, not managed, not professional. Just two people sitting with the weight of something real between them, neither one moving to put it down. If I let you... She stopped, didn't finish the sentence. Tell me, he said. If I let you... She started again, and her voice caught on the edge of something, not quite breaking, catching. If I let you in and you do this again? If you hedge again or categorize me again or make me feel like a system that you're optimizing? If you make me feel like that again, there is no recovering from it, for either of us. You understand that? Yes, he said. No hesitation. I'm not a contingency plan. No. I'm not something you get to hold in reserve while you figure out what you actually want. No, you're not. I'm a person. Her voice cracked on the last word very slightly, and she pressed her lips together and pulled it back. I have spent 6 years being excellent and invisible for you, and I will not do it again. I will not. I know. He stopped himself. I hear you. And I know that my knowing it now is too late in a lot of ways, and I'm not asking you to... He exhaled. I'm not asking you to forgive the timeline. I'm asking you to. He stopped, because she had turned fully toward him, and the expression on her face was not closed off and not open and not any of the things he'd been reading in her face for the last 4 months. It was something nakeder than all of those. Something that looked like standing at the edge of something high and understanding that the only way forward was through. Camille, he said. And then, because all the rehearsed versions had failed and the only thing left was the stripped bare truth. I love you. Not what you do. Not what you manage or what you protect or what you make run. You, the specific, particular, difficult, extraordinary you. The you that challenged me when everyone else was nodding. The you that named a plant Gerald. The you that wrote 11 drafts of a resignation letter and made sure the transition folder was complete because you wanted the company to survive even when you were breaking. His voice had gone rough at the edges. He didn't try to smooth it. I love the parts you try to hide, the insecurities, the hope you protect like it's the last warm thing left. I love that you're angry right now, and I love that you won't let me off easy. And I love that you carry a succulent across the Pacific because you refuse to abandon something you've been taking care of. He stopped. I should have said this years ago. I should have said it the first time I understood it, which was earlier than I admitted to myself. I didn't, and I will spend a long time paying the price for that, and I will pay it without asking you to reduce it. The bench was very still. Her eyes were wet now. She didn't blink it away, didn't manage it. Let it be there. That's... She stopped. I know it's not enough, he said. I know the timing is... Stop! She held up one hand, closed her eyes, breathed. One slow inhale, one slow exhale, the breath of someone who has run a very long way and is deciding whether they have enough left to run further. She opened her eyes. She looked at him with everything, the 6 years, the hurt, the exhaustion, the stubborn undead hope that she had tried repeatedly to bury and that had refused, with great personal inconvenience, to stay buried. My flight is at 7, she said. I know. I have to be at the airport by 5. I know. It's almost 2. I know. That's 3 hours, Adrian. I know. She looked at him. He looked at her. The river moved between its banks, patient and indifferent and ancient, the way rivers are. Then stop wasting them, she said. And the space between them on the bench, closed. Not dramatically. Not the way it happens in films where someone lunges and the music swells and the camera pulls back to reveal the city shimmering below. It closed the way real things close, slowly, with the particular awkwardness of two people who have been circling each other for 6 years and have finally run out of orbit. He moved first, shifted toward her by a few inches, that was all. She didn't move away. For a long moment they just sat like that, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through the cool spring air, and neither of them said anything because there was nothing to say yet that would be better than the silence. His hand found hers on the bench, not taking it, just placing his hand beside hers, barely touching, the question before the question. She turned her hand over. He laced his fingers through hers, and she felt the pressure of it, the way you feel something you have imagined so many times it has lost its edges, and then you encounter the real version and realize the imagined thing was pale and approximate and nothing like this. She stared at the river. I'm still going to New York, she said. I know. That's not negotiable. I know. I'm not negotiating. She turned to look at him, close now, close enough to see the lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 2 years ago. The particular tiredness that sat in him that was not the tiredness of overwork, but of someone who had been carrying something unacknowledged for a very long time. What does this look like? She said. Practically. Tell me what you think this looks like. He didn't answer immediately, which she respected. He was thinking, actually thinking, not reaching for the smooth response. Honestly, he said, I don't know exactly. I know I'll come to New York, often. I know I want to meet your mother properly. Not as your former employer showing up with professional courtesy, but as... He paused. As whoever I am to you, which is something I'd like to spend considerable time figuring out. I know it will be difficult, the distance, the history. His thumb moved slightly against her hand. I know I'll get things wrong. I know I will frustrate you, probably regularly, Because I am still the same person who spent 6 years being emotionally illiterate about the most important relationship in my life, and that doesn't reverse overnight. She watched his face while he said it. He wasn't performing humility. He was reporting it. The same flat precision he brought to market analyses and board presentations turned inward, which was so unlike every previous version of him that she felt it as a physical thing, a shift in something structural. "You'll frustrate me," she agreed. "Yes. Frequently. Probably. And when you do, when you default to the old patterns, because you will, people don't just stop defaulting to old patterns because they have a conversation on a bench." She held his gaze. "What happens then?" "Then you tell me." He said it simply. "The way you always told me, directly and without softening it because you decided I couldn't handle it." A pause. "Except this time I'll be listening for a different reason." She was quiet for a moment. "What reason?" "Because I want to know," he said. "Not because the information is useful, because it's you telling me." The river held its light. A late-night bus crossed the bridge above them, its windows glowing. "Gerald II better survive the flight," she said finally. Something shifted in his face. Relief, she thought, though it was quieter than relief usually looked. "He will. He's well packed. I named him before I knew you sent him. In my head, I'd already named him." "What did you name him?" "Gerald II. He almost smiled. "That's the same name." "I know. He's a legacy plant." She looked at their joined hands. "I cried when I opened the package. I want you to know that, not performatively. I sat in the mailroom and I cried. And I was angry at you for making me cry. And I was angry at myself for letting you. And then I just—" She exhaled. "I just let myself feel it without managing it. My therapist would call that progress." "You have a therapist." "Since Atlanta, 4 months." She glanced at him. "You should get one." "I'm considering it." "Consider it more firmly." "Okay." She leaned back slightly, her head tilting toward the river. His hand still held hers. The city moved around them, reduced at this hour to its essential sounds. Water, distant traffic. The world continuing without requiring anything from either of them for just this small window of time. "I need to tell you something," she said. Her voice was quieter now. The sharp edges had settled into something slower. "About the night I overheard you talking to Tae Jun. Tell me. It didn't break me just because of what you said." She paused, organizing it. "It broke me because of what I had been doing to myself. I had been making myself smaller. Every year, a little smaller. Not because you asked me to. You never asked me to. But because I had decided, unconsciously, that the way to stay close to you was to be indispensable. To be so embedded in everything you needed that leaving me behind would be structurally impossible." She stopped. "I was trying to make you need me because I was afraid you didn't want me." He said nothing. Let it be said completely. "And when I heard you say I was a load-bearing wall, I understood that I had succeeded. I had made myself exactly what I was trying to make myself." Her jaw tightened briefly, which meant that the strategy I had chosen, the one I had built 6 years of my life around, had worked perfectly and produced exactly the wrong result. She turned to look at him. "I'm telling you this because I need you to understand that what happened wasn't only something you did to me. I participated. I built the cage and called it safety, and then was devastated when it functioned as a cage." He looked at her steadily. "That doesn't reduce what I didn't see." "No, but it's part of the true version." She held his gaze. "I need us to deal with the true version. Not the one where I'm just a victim of your obliviousness and you're just a villain who never noticed. Those are both easier stories and they're both wrong." "What's the true version?" She thought about it. The river light moved on the water. "Two people who were both afraid of the same thing," she said. "You were afraid of needing something you couldn't control. I was afraid of wanting something I couldn't guarantee. So we built a professional structure to live inside, and it worked, and we called it something manageable. And eventually it cost us both something we can't get back." He was quiet for a long moment. "The 6 years," he said. "Yes. I'm sorry for them. I know you are." She squeezed his hand briefly. "I'm sorry for the parts that were mine to own, the parts where I chose smallness over honesty." He shook his head slightly. "You shouldn't have had to." "Adrian?" Her voice was firm, gentle but firm. "Don't absolve me. Let me own my part. That's how the true version works. He looked at her, nodded once. Okay, okay, she said. At 3:15 a.m., she said she needed to go back to her apartment to collect her luggage. He got them a car. Sat beside her in the back, their shoulders almost touching. The city scrolling past the windows in the late-night empty way of cities when the performance of themselves has finally shut down for a few hours. She looked at the streets she had learned over 4 months, the particular corner where she'd found the good coffee, the bookshop that stayed open late, the street food cart she had eaten from twice a week without fail. All of it already past tense in the way of places you're leaving, already coated in the amber of memory before the leaving is complete. Tell me something about New York, he said. What do you want to know? Something you're afraid of. She considered. The scale of it, the project. Dr. Reyes has given me almost complete autonomy, which is what I asked for and what I wanted. And I'm also... It's a long way from the structure of working inside someone else's system. A pause. I've been the person who supports the vision for 6 years. Building my own... She stopped. It's different. Being accountable to yourself is different. You'll do it, he said. No qualification, no encouragement voice. Just flatly, like a fact. You don't know that. I watched you manage crisis situations that would have dismantled other organizations. I watched you navigate board conflicts that had been calcifying for decades. I watched you, He paused. I watched you run most of what I was credited for, and you did it without asking to be credited, which was your choice, and also something I should have challenged. You'll build this. He looked at her profile in the car window reflection. You'll build it, and it'll be extraordinary, and I will attend the opening night and stand in the back of the room and try not to look like I'm about to cry. She turned to look at him. Adrian Huang does not cry. Adrian Huang cried in his car twice in the last 4 months. I'm going to ask you to keep that between us. She stared at him. Twice. Twice. When? The morning after you left, and... He stopped. The day Ji Young told me about the New York job. Secondhand, because you hadn't told me yet. He looked out the window. I found out through a foundation contact who mentioned it in passing at a dinner. I went home and sat in my kitchen for 2 hours, and then... A brief silence. Yes? Twice? She was quiet for a long time. Why didn't you call me that night? She said softly. Because I hadn't yet finished figuring out whether what I felt was what I thought it was, or whether it was just loss aversion, the inability to accept a gap in my system. His voice was steady, reporting honestly. I needed to be certain it was real before I asked anything of you with it. After everything. He paused. I was too slow. I know that. You were, she agreed. I'm working on being faster. Work harder. But she said it without cruelty, and he heard the without cruelty. Her apartment was exactly as packed as she'd described on the phone. Everything already in luggage, the surfaces bare, the walls returned to their rental neutrality. She had not accumulated much in 4 months, which she said was intentional. She'd wanted to be able to leave without a long goodbye to objects. He stood in the center of the empty living room while she did a final check of the bathroom, the closets, the kitchen drawers. He looked at the space she had lived in and tried to imagine her here, in the evenings, rebuilding herself inside these 4 walls, and couldn't fully picture it because he had not been permitted to be part of it. And that exclusion was correct and still cost him something. She came back into the living room with Gerald II under one arm and her carry-on handle in her other hand. She stopped when she saw his face. What? She said. Nothing. He moved to take the carry-on. Let me. I have it. Camille. She looked at him for a second, then let him take the bag. Fine. Thank you. Don't push it. He didn't push it. He carried the bag. The car to the airport left at 4:15 a.m. They sat in the back and she leaned against his shoulder without deciding to, without announcing it, just leaned. The way bodies move toward warmth when the hour is very late and the defenses have been down long enough that they forget to reassemble. He kept very still, the way you keep still when something you've been afraid of losing has finally landed close, and you understand that the wrong movement could disturb it. She slept for maybe 20 minutes. He didn't sleep. He watched the airport highway unspool through the windshield and thought about all the things that were going to have to change, All the ways he was going to have to be different in practice rather than in declaration. All the accumulated habits of emotional distance and control and management that didn't unpack in a single night on a bench by the river. He thought about his father, who had built HWG Group from a mid-sized logistics company by the pure force of his refusal to stop, and who had also died at 61 with the particular loneliness of a man who had made himself indispensable to a company and mysterious to his own family. Adrian had spent 30 years telling himself he was different from his father, that he had better social intelligence, that he understood the importance of people in ways his father hadn't. He was beginning to understand that he had been mostly wrong about that. But mostly wrong was not entirely wrong, and entirely wrong was not permanent, and the woman sleeping against his shoulder in the back of a car at 4:30 a.m. had with characteristic honesty identified the true version. Two afraid people who had chosen safety over truth, and were now, too late and imperfectly, choosing differently. He put his head against the top of hers, very slightly. She didn't wake. He stayed like that for the rest of the drive. The departure hall at 5:10 a.m. was its own specific world. Harsh lighting, the particular exhausted energy of people in transit, families saying goodbye with the compressed intensity of people who have already used up the emotional time and must now get through the logistical. Camille moved through it with the competence of a frequent traveler, bag already checked by the curb, carry-on in hand, Gerald II secured. He walked with her to the security line. He did not have a ticket and could go no further. They stood at the entrance to the security queue. She was looking at the line, he was looking at her, looking at the line. "I need you to do something," she said. "Anything. Don't call me every day." She turned. "I mean that. I will be building something. I will be working harder than I have worked in 4 years, which is saying something. I need to be able to do that without waiting for your calls or structuring my evenings around them." She held his gaze. "Call me when you have something real to say. Not as a maintenance call, not as a we should stay in touch call. When you have something real. Okay? And when you come to New York, which you will, I need advance notice. Real advance notice. Not Adrian Huang advance notice, which is 48 hours, actual advance notice. I'll give you a week. Minimum. Minimum, he agreed. She nodded, looked back at the line. A family moved past them, a small child carrying a stuffed animal, the parents negotiating carry-on and documents and exhaustion. "There's one more thing," Camille said. He waited. "Your team," she said. "The people who work with you. After I left, the replacements, the people who've been trying to fill in, I need you to stop expecting them to be me. Not because they can or can't match the work, because it's not fair to them, and because you're doing to them what you did to me, which is turning a person into a function, and they will leave too, eventually, and you will have learned nothing." He absorbed this. "I know. Minjun has been with you 3 years, and you've never once asked him about his family. I know. Ask him. I will. Not because it's strategic, because he's a person. I understand the difference now." She looked at him, assessing. The same look she used to give him across the conference table when she was deciding whether to trust a commitment he'd made. "I think you might," she said finally. Quiet. Not fully convinced, but not unconvinced either. The honest version. "I'm going to prove it," he said. "Not in a grand gesture. In the regular way. Over time. That's the only way it counts." "I know." She picked up her bag, shifted Gerald II to a more secure position. He reached out and touched her face. Just briefly, just the side of her jaw with the back of 2 fingers. The most careful touch he was capable of. And she let him. And she looked at him with all 6 years and all 4 months and all 3 hours on the bench and all 20 minutes sleeping in the car and didn't say anything, because some moments are not improved by language. "Go build your thing," he said. Her eyes were bright. She kept them that way. Didn't blink it down. Didn't manage it. Let it be visible. "Take care of your people," she said. "I will." She turned, walked to the line, handed over her documents, moved through the initial check, lifted the carry-on to the conveyor belt with practiced efficiency. On the other side of the security arch, she stopped, turned back. He was still standing there. He hadn't moved. He was exactly where she'd left him, coat slightly rumpled from the night, looking at her with an expression she had never seen on him before in 6 years. Open, clear, without strategy or management, or any of the elaborate scaffolding he usually kept between himself and the world. He just looked at her. She raised one hand, the smallest wave, the simplest gesture, the kind of goodbye that was also a something else. He raised his hand in return. Then she picked up her bag, tucked Gerald II securely under her arm, and walked toward the gate. She did not look back a second time. Not because she was performing closure, she had done enough performing. She didn't look back because she didn't need to. She knew exactly what she was leaving, and she knew exactly what she was walking toward. And for the first time in 6 years, both of those things were true simultaneously, without one canceling the other. The departure hall moved around her, families, travelers, the whole churning human machinery of people in transit, and she moved through it like someone who knew where she was going. 3 days later, New York received her the way cities receive people who are ready for them, without ceremony, without accommodation, without any particular interest in whether she was prepared. It simply was what it was, enormous and indifferent and full of possibility, and she walked out of JFK into the sharp early summer air and took a cab to the apartment Dr. Reyes had helped her find in Brooklyn, and stood in the center of an unfurnished room with her luggage at her feet and Gerald II on the windowsill. The window faced east. Morning light. She stood there for a long time, just stood in the empty room, in the new city, with nothing yet on the walls and nothing yet in the drawers, and no system yet established for any of it. She thought about her mother's kitchen table, about therapy and Atlanta and the long, slow work of learning to occupy herself fully rather than half. She thought about a bench by the Han River at 2 a.m., and a man who had finally shown up without his armor, and the 3 hours she had spent deciding, quietly and completely, that she was willing, not blindly, not with her eyes closed, not the way she used to be willing, but genuinely, carefully, eyes open willing, to let the next part be written in a new way. She put Gerald II in the center of the windowsill where he would get the most light. New chapter, she told him. Gerald II had no opinion, being a succulent, but he caught the morning light and held it, and that was enough. 8 months later, the International Cultural Advancement Initiative held its first major event, a 3-day festival in Lower Manhattan celebrating cross-cultural artistic exchange, 14 countries represented, 17 programs running simultaneously, 2 years of her life compressed into 72 hours of living proof that the thing she had imagined was the thing she had built. On the evening of the second day, the main auditorium was full. Camille stood in the wings watching a Korean-American string quartet perform a piece that wove traditional pansori vocalization into contemporary composition, and she felt something she didn't have a precise word for. Not pride exactly, not satisfaction exactly, something larger and quieter than both. She heard him before she saw him. Not his voice, his footsteps, the rhythm of them, the particular pace she had spent 6 years unconsciously memorizing. He appeared beside her in the wing, slightly out of breath, jacket neat, but she could see from the set of his shoulders that he had moved quickly to get here in time. Flight was delayed, he said quietly. I know. Ji-young texted me. Ah, a beat. Ji-young. She has your flight information. I didn't ask her to, she just, it's fine. He looked out at the auditorium, at the full room, the people, the enormous living thing she had assembled from concept and will and 18 months of work. His expression did the thing she had seen once in a car at 4 a.m., open, without scaffolding. Camille. Don't, she said softly. Watch first. Say it after. He watched. The quartet finished. The room responded. Not polite applause, the real kind, the kind that starts before people have decided to clap, that comes from something being genuinely moved. In the wing, she felt his hand find hers, the same way it had on the bench, not taking, just offering. The question before the question. She laced her fingers through his. Okay, she said quietly. Now you can say it. He turned to look at her. In the sidelight of the stage, she looked like exactly what she was, someone who had built something significant from the ground up, who had chosen herself first and built outward from there, who was standing in the result of the bravest sequence of decisions she had ever made. I'm proud of you, he said. That's all. Just, I'm proud of you. She looked at him for a long moment. At the man who had learned slowly and at considerable cost to both of them that efficiency was not a substitute for visibility, that management was not a substitute for love, that showing up late was not the same as not showing up if you showed up honestly when you finally arrived. He was not a finished project. She knew that. Neither was she. They were both still in progress, carrying the specific damage of the 6 years and the 4 months and the mistakes they had made with and without intent. There would be weeks when the old patterns surfaced, and they would have to name them and work through them. There would be hard conversations and longer silences, and the particular difficulty of two people who had been afraid of the same thing learning together to be less afraid. None of that was over. All of it was still ahead. But he had come. He had learned what she needed to be seen as, and he was seeing her that way, without being asked, on a random Tuesday evening in a theater wing in Manhattan, slightly out of breath from a delayed flight, and looking at her like she was the only specific thing in the room. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I'll always come," he said simply. Not a promise made for effect, a statement of intention backed by 8 months of evidence. The calls that carried real things, the visits that arrived with the promised notice, the slow, patient work of a man dismantling habits he'd spent a lifetime constructing. She believed him, not blindly, with full awareness of the cost of the time she'd been wrong to believe things, with complete knowledge that belief was a risk she was choosing rather than a certainty she'd been handed. She believed him anyway. That was new. That was the thing therapy in Atlanta and 6 months in Seoul and 18 months in New York had finally built in her. The ability to choose trust as an act of courage rather than withhold it as an act of survival. She leaned her head briefly against his shoulder. He stayed still. He was getting better at staying still. On stage, the next performers were setting up. A Ghanaian-Korean dance collaboration. 2 traditions negotiating a shared rhythm, finding through practice and patience and the willingness to be uncomfortable what they couldn't find by staying separate. Camille watched them warm up, her hand still in his, and thought that this was the only ending worth having. Not the clean one, not the easy one, not the one where the damage didn't happen and the years didn't cost what they cost. The real one, where 2 imperfect people stood in the evidence of who they had chosen to become and chose each other again, with full information, on purpose. Not because the past was behind them, because they were finally, genuinely walking forward, together and not identical. Close and not merged, changed by everything that had happened and not destroyed by any of it. That was enough. In the window of her Brooklyn apartment, Gerald II caught the morning light each day and held it without being asked, the way small, persistent things do. Quietly, reliably, asking for very little and growing anyway. It turned out that was the whole lesson. You tend to the thing, you show up for it, you make sure it has light, and you let it be alive in its own way, on its own terms, without needing to control the direction it grows. The rest takes care of itself.